My aunt and uncle took me in after my parents died, then tried to erase me from existence. I was 16 when the police came to the school office and pulled me out of class. They told me my parents had died in a car accident. Head-on collision. Instant. That was all. One minute I was stressing about the chemistry quiz I hadn't studied for, and the next, my world fell into a silence so deep I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, knees trembling, staring through the principal's shoulder like the sentence hadn't registered. I was an only child. We didn't have much family left. No grandparents, no cousins I'd ever really met. But I did have an aunt and uncle, my dad's younger brother and his wife, Anna and Greg. I only remembered them from a few holiday dinners when I was much younger. They lived 2 towns over in a nicer neighborhood with white fences and manicured hedges and too many glass decorations in the living room. They showed up at the station after the accident, all crocodile tears and hushed voices. Anna held my hand like we were best friends, even though I barely knew her. Greg called me kiddo and said they'd figure this out. And just like that, they took me home. It wasn't a warm welcome. There wasn't even a bedroom ready. I slept on a pull-out couch in their office for the first few weeks while Anna kept saying things like, "We didn't expect this kind of responsibility, and we'll do what we can." They didn't take guardianship immediately. For a while, they kept telling the social worker that they were waiting to see what the estate documents say. That should have been a red flag. But I was in shock, traumatized, and trying to survive every day without completely falling apart. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have the strength. Slowly, things changed. Or maybe they just showed their true faces. Anna started policing everything I ate. She'd portion my meals and complain about how expensive groceries were. Greg made offhand comments about how teenagers were leeches. They gave me a corner of the laundry room to keep my clothes. I wasn't allowed to use the upstairs bathroom. My textbooks had to be returned to school spotless. They reminded me every night. When I asked if I could see my parents' will, or anything, even just to understand what was happening, Anna snapped. She said it wasn't something a child should worry about, and that I was lucky to even have a roof over my head. After that, I stopped asking. Then came the isolation. My school was changed. New district. New town. I wasn't allowed to keep in contact with my old friends because Anna said they were a bad influence and reminders of trauma. She took my phone, said it was a distraction from healing. For a long time, I believed them. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe they were right. Maybe they really were just trying to help. But the cracks widened the day I found the manila envelope. It was hidden under a stack of tax papers in Greg's locked filing cabinet. He was out golfing, and Anna was running errands. I wasn't snooping, exactly. I was trying to find the charger for the old tablet they let me use once a week. But when I opened that drawer, something about the envelope caught my eye. My name was written on it. Inside was a copy of my parents' will. They had named Anna and Greg as temporary guardians, temporary, until my 18th birthday. And they had left everything to me. The house, the life insurance, 2 small retirement accounts. It wasn't millions, but it was enough. It was security, stability. It was mine. And they never told me. In fact, it had already been partially liquidated. I found the transaction printouts clipped behind the will. Bank transfers. One of them was for $38,000, labeled home repairs. Another, $11,000 to consulting services. A third one, nearly $70,000, was marked simply as reallocation for care. I felt sick. They'd sold my childhood home. They'd taken the insurance money. And they were pretending that I was a burden. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal, but my head was spinning. I knew I couldn't confront them. Not yet. I needed help. But I had no phone, no access to the internet. No friends. No one who would even know if I disappeared. And that's when I realized they hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They were erasing me. I didn't tell them I knew. Not right away. That was the hardest part. Waking up each morning and walking past them at the kitchen table, pretending not to know they'd gutted my future behind my back. I said, "Thank you," when Anna handed me burnt toast. I nodded when Greg asked if I'd cleaned the garage like he'd told me to. I smiled when they talked about budgeting and how I should start thinking about trade school. I was planning something. The next time I was at school, I asked to use the counselor's office computer to check my grades. The second I sat down, I opened an incognito window and searched for a lawyer. Then I emailed myself copies of the will, the bank transfers, and the scanned documents I'd taken photos of with the tablet when they weren't looking. I titled the email something boring, math homework revision, and deleted the history. It felt like I was sneaking around in a spy movie. Except in those movies, the character always has a team behind them. I had no one. Just me. A scared, exhausted 16-year-old who hadn't known safety since her parents died. That night, Greg found me in the laundry room staring at the dryer. I hadn't moved for almost 10 minutes. My body just froze, looping images of my parents' smiles, the old living room, the dog we had to give away after the accident. Everything they'd taken from me. I must have looked weird, because he leaned in and said, too softly, "You're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you?" That was the moment I knew. He didn't just want me quiet. He wanted me gone. In every way. I emailed the lawyer again, this time from the school computer. I told her everything. Attached every document. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. I didn't care what it cost. I just wanted the truth to matter. 3 days later, I was called into the office. A woman from Child Services was waiting for me. She had the printed will in her folder. And for once, someone looked at me like they believed me. Anna and Greg were furious. They showed up to the meeting in full fake parent mode, worried expressions, furrowed brows, crocodile sympathy. They said I was deeply troubled, that I was making things up to cope with grief. Anna even cried. Greg folded his arms and said that teenagers lie when they're upset. But the lawyer had receipts, literal receipts, of the transfers, of the sale of the house, of emails sent to a realtor with Anna's name on them. They said they were renovating it, but there had been no renovations. They had listed and sold it quietly within 6 months of my parents' funeral. I was removed from their care immediately. I was placed in temporary foster care while things were processed, and even though I was sleeping on a bunk bed in a shared room with 3 other girls who barely spoke to me, I slept better that night than I had in a year. For the next 6 months, everything moved in waves. There were court hearings, depositions, paperwork, so much paperwork. Anna and Greg tried to stall. They filed a countersuit claiming they'd used the money in good faith, that it had always been understood that I wasn't emotionally capable of managing an estate, that they'd been protecting me. It didn't hold up. By the time I turned 17, the court ruled that what they had done constituted financial abuse and exploitation of a minor. They were fined, forced to repay as much as they could, and banned from any contact with me. The rest of the estate was frozen for my protection until my 18th birthday, to be managed by a neutral fiduciary. It wasn't all rainbows. Most of the money they spent couldn't be recovered. Greg had poured it into a fake business that flopped, and Anna had used it to remodel their kitchen. But it was enough. Enough to pay for therapy, for college, for stability. I never saw them again. But that wasn't the end. I kept going. Quietly. Focused. I graduated early. Applied for scholarships. Got into a state school with a strong pre-law program. I wanted to help kids like me. Kids who got lost in the system. Kids whose voices were drowned by fake tears and clean credit scores. My 18th birthday came with no candles, no cake, no happy birthday text from anyone related to me. But I got a letter from the court-appointed trustee saying the remainder of my estate had been fully transferred into my name. I stared at that letter for almost an hour. And then I cried for the first time since my parents died. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt free. It had been almost 2 years. College was quieter than I expected. I stayed off social media. I didn't join clubs or throw myself into dorm life. I studied hard, kept my head down, and tried to live like a normal 18-year-old. Therapy helped. Not instantly, not perfectly, but enough to start breathing differently. I started sleeping through the night again. I even bought myself a secondhand camera because I remembered my dad teaching me how to use one on our road trips. I took photos of ordinary things, benches, brick walls, strangers sipping coffee, like I was rebuilding the world one frame at a time. And then they came back. I hadn't thought of Anna and Greg in months. The last I'd heard, they tried to appeal the judgment and failed. They lost their house not long after. Bankruptcy filings showed up in the legal records. Greg had closed his consulting business, a shell company he'd been using to move funds around, and Anna had lost her license to work in real estate. I never imagined I'd hear from them again. But on a quiet Thursday morning, just before midterms, I got an email. The subject line was blank. The sender was unfamiliar, just a string of letters and numbers. But when I opened it, the first sentence made my whole body freeze. "You were always going to destroy us, weren't you?" It was Anna. No hello. No apology. Just 5 paragraphs of venom dressed in victimhood. She blamed me for everything. Their finances, their reputations, their marriage. Apparently Greg had left her 6 months ago, and her complete social ostracization. She said I'd ruined her life for a couple of bank statements. That I was cold, manipulative, and ungrateful. She said she knew I would come crawling back one day, when the real world eats you alive. She said she'd forgive me when I did. I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. I just archived the email, blocked the address, and sent it to my lawyer, who already had a record of their no-contact order violations. But that was just the beginning. A few days later, Greg emailed me from a different burner account. His tone was worse, angrier. He said he knew I had help, that some bleeding heart lawyer fed you lies, and that I'd been brainwashed. He said I'd embarrassed him, that I should have known better than to drag family into a courtroom. He ended it by calling me a spoiled little parasite. I never replied to him either, but I started looking them up. I didn't mean to. I told myself it was just curiosity. But part of me wanted to know what became of them now that they no longer had a scapegoat. Anna was living in a rented one-bedroom apartment downtown. She tried to start a blog about reinventing yourself after trauma, but it had less than 10 followers. Greg had tried to pitch some kind of business podcast, but every post was filled with passive-aggressive rants about entitled youth and corrupt legal systems. They were both spiraling, slowly and publicly. But the worst part? They weren't done. 2 weeks after those emails, a thread appeared on a local Facebook group I'd once followed for housing leads. The post had no names, but it was unmistakably about me. A family member who had suffered unthinkable betrayal by a teenager they tried to raise. It accused me of abuse, manipulation, theft. And though the names weren't there, my old house was in the background of a photo she uploaded. The house they sold behind my back. I sent everything to my lawyer. We filed for a cease and desist. But even as I waited for the legal gears to turn again, I didn't feel scared. I felt stronger. They could scream into the void all they wanted. But I had built something they could never touch. Not just a legal case. Not just a name. A life. A future. A truth that outlived their lies. That night, I pulled out my camera and walked 3 miles into the city. I took photos of storefronts, of bridges, of people dancing under neon signs. I took pictures like I was taking proof. I am still here. I am still standing. I am still free. It was never about revenge. I told myself that over and over again. But when my lawyer called me 3 weeks after the cease and desist was sent, her voice tight, urgent, and strangely excited, I knew something had changed. She told me a reporter had reached out. Someone from a local investigative blog. They'd been forwarded the Facebook post Anna had made, and they'd done some digging. What they found wasn't small. Greg had been under investigation, quietly, for months, for embezzling funds through his failed consulting company. Not just during my case, but before it. Apparently, there were whispers that he'd been moving money through phantom clients, skimming from retirement accounts of vulnerable older people who thought they were getting tax help. But the investigation stalled because he'd buried it under family paperwork. Specifically, my parents' estate. The guardianship claims, the story of the grieving niece they took and it had been used as a smokescreen. Anna, it turns out, had been in on it. Her name was tied to a few investment portfolios that were really just slush accounts. And when the reporter pieced it together, the embezzlement, the financial abuse, the public smear campaign, she contacted my attorney for comment. It felt surreal. For so long, I was the girl who whispered the truth in empty rooms, who buried evidence like treasure, who lived quiet because loud meant unsafe. And now, people were listening. We gave a statement. Short, factual, no drama, no accusations, just what had already been proven in court. But the blog published the full story anyway. The original guardianship, the stolen money, the fake companies, even the social media harassment. And this time, they named names. It blew up. Not nationally, but big enough. It made its way into local news. People started sharing it. Old neighbors commented. Former clients of Greg's stepped forward. A woman who said he helped consolidate her late husband's investments wrote a full post about how she'd never seen a dime. Anna deleted all her social media the same night. Greg's podcast episodes vanished. Their blog disappeared. I watched in real time as the people who used to control every narrative suddenly lost control of their own. And still, I didn't speak out publicly. Not under my name. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I didn't need to. The truth was doing just fine without me. That weekend, I visited my parents' old neighborhood. The house was long gone, sold, gutted, remodeled. I didn't go there. I went to the park we used to visit on Sunday mornings. Sat on a bench, listened to the wind, brought a copy of the blog article with me, folded in my coat pocket like a relic. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was weirder. Bigger. Closure. The kind that doesn't come from screaming matches or courtroom victories. The kind that builds itself slowly, like scar tissue. Quiet and permanent. I stayed until the sun dipped low and the park lights buzzed on. Then I walked home. I graduate in 3 weeks. I already have a job lined up. A real one, not coffee runs, not data entry. An advocacy role at a nonprofit that provides legal resources for teens in foster care and survivors of guardianship abuse. When I interviewed, I told them I knew what that kind of pain looked like. I didn't tell them how. They didn't ask. But I could see it in the director's eyes. She knew anyway. They offered me the position on the spot. It doesn't pay 6 figures. There's no company car or free gym. But it's mine. Every part of it is mine. I rented a little apartment across from the train station. My name's on the lease. My books are stacked by the window. My cheap secondhand record player hums at night. I built shelves from scratch. I keep flowers in old jars. I breathe like the air belongs to me again. And no one has control over me anymore. Not Greg, not Anna, not their smear campaigns or fake forgiveness. They are names in court documents. Footnotes in an origin story they don't get to rewrite. After the article came out, a few old family acquaintances reached out. An uncle I hadn't seen since I was 4. A second cousin from another state. They said they never really trusted Anna, that they wished they'd done more. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. The absence of their help no longer defines me. What defines me now is the work I do. The way I answer a call from a scared 16-year-old and say, I believe you. The way I sit with them in court and teach them how to breathe slowly while lawyers argue overhead. The way I smile, not as a mask, but as proof that yes, it's possible. You can go through hell and still come out with something beautiful. Sometimes, late at night, I take my camera and walk the same streets I once wandered crying. I take photos of bus stops, of graffiti, of windows glowing gold in the dark. And I whisper to the girl I used to be, you made it. You didn't disappear. You weren't erased. And you never will be.